The letter arrived on a Tuesday, when dust clouds rolled across the valley like funeral shrouds, and the weight of 3 years waiting crashed down on Tabitha Lowell's shoulders. Her fingers trembled as she tore open the War Department envelope, the paper cutting into her skin as the words blurred before her eyes. "We regret to inform you that Captain Philip Lowell has been confirmed killed in action." Tabitha's knees buckled beneath her, the wooden porch steps of her modest Randsburg home catching her fall as the California sun beat down mercilessly overhead. Philip had promised to return from the Spanish-American War. 3 long years of waiting, and now this official confirmation of what she'd feared in her darkest moments but refused to believe. "Mrs. Lowell," a voice called from the gate. "Are you all right, madam?" Through tear-filled eyes, Tabitha made out the tall figure of Preston Xavier, one of the ranch hands from the neighboring Double X spread. He stood awkwardly at her fence line, hat in his hands, dust coating his worn leather chaps. "I'm fine," she lied, quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The letter crumpled in her fist as she rose to her feet, smoothing her calico dress with forced dignity. Preston shifted his weight, seemingly unconvinced. "Brought over that mare you were asking about. Mr. Thornton said you might want to look her over before deciding. The horses, the boarding stable." Reality came rushing back. Since Philip had left in '98, she'd barely kept their small homestead and horse boarding business going. Every day had been a battle against bankruptcy, loneliness, and the persistent offers from the mining company to buy her out. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. I'll come see her." Tabitha tucked the letter into her pocket, grateful for the distraction. She couldn't fall apart now. Not in front of this man, not in front of anyone. The mare was a beautiful sorrel with a white blaze, exactly what she needed to expand her breeding stock if she could afford it. Tabitha ran her hands along the horse's withers, checking her conformation while fighting back tears that threatened to overwhelm her again. "She's a good horse," Preston said quietly. "Gentle disposition. Good with foals." Tabitha nodded, not trusting her voice. The silence stretched between them until Preston cleared his throat. "I heard about mail coming in today," he said carefully. "Got news," she stiffened, her hand pausing on the mare's neck. "My husband is dead." The words fell from her lips, the first time she'd said them aloud, and they hung in the hot, dry air between them. Preston removed his hat fully, revealing a shock of sandy brown hair. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lowell, truly." His voice carried no false sympathy, just genuine regret. "Captain Lowell was a good man. You knew him." Tabitha looked up sharply. "We rode together briefly before he enlisted, different outfits but crossed trails a few times." Preston's blue eyes held something she couldn't quite read. "He spoke often of you, proudly." A fresh wave of grief washed over her. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Xavier, but I have work to do." She turned away, unable to bear another moment of compassion that might break her carefully constructed composure. "Mrs. Lowell," Preston called softly as she walked toward the house. "I'll wait." She paused, not turning back. "Wait for what?" "Till you're ready to smile again," he said simply. "The mare can stay as long as you need to decide. No rush." Tabitha nodded once before continuing to her empty house, where she finally allowed herself to collapse against the door and weep for the future that would never be. The weeks that followed passed in a haze of grief and practical matters. The War Department had sent Philip's personal effects, his pocket watch, wedding ring, a few letters she'd written that he'd carried with him. The small wooden box sat unopened on her mantel for days before she found the courage to look inside. Randsburg's residents were kind but distant in the way of frontier towns. Some brought food, others offered condolences, but most simply nodded respectfully when they saw her in town. The mining boom that had built Randsburg was starting to wane, and everyone had their own struggles. Preston Xavier appeared every few days with some transparent excuse, bringing a supplement for the mare, offering to fix a loose board on her corral, delivering a message from his employer. Each time he worked quietly, asking for nothing, leaving when finished with a simple tip of his hat and the same gentle reminder, "I'll wait." It infuriated her at first, his patience, his careful distance. What right did he have to make such a promise? What made him think she'd ever smile again? Yet somehow his steady presence became something she found herself expecting, then looking forward to. On a blistering hot August afternoon, when the boarding stable was empty save for 3 horses, and Tabitha was calculating how many more months she could hold on before selling, Preston arrived leading a string of 5 horses. "Mr. Thornton's sending these from his new stock," Preston explained, dismounting with fluid grace. "Says they need training before he can sell them, and he heard you were the best with young horses." Tabitha frowned, immediately suspicious. "Mr. Thornton has his own trainers." Preston shrugged. "He wants these done special, offering fair pay, $20 per horse plus boarding fees." It was a generous offer, more than generous, and they both knew it. "I don't need charity," she said stiffly. "Not charity, Mrs. Lowell, business." His eyes met hers directly. "Thornton's particular about who handles his investment stock. If you don't want the work, I can take them back." She assessed the horses, young, well-bred quarter horses with good conformation, the kind of stock that would indeed need careful handling to maximize their value. The kind of work she excelled at. "I'll take them," she finally agreed, "but only because it's good business." The shadow of a smile crossed Preston's face as he handed her the lead rope. "Of course, madam, only business." As he helped her settle the horses into her corral, Tabitha found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. He was younger than Philip had been, perhaps 28 to her 25, with a lean strength that spoke of years in the saddle. His hands were calloused but gentle with the horses, and he moved with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "How long have you worked for Thornton?" she asked as they finished. "Going on 3 years now," he answered, coiling a length of rope. "Came west from Texas after some trouble with cattle rustlers. Needed a fresh start." "Texas?" Something clicked in her memory. Philip mentioned a Texan who saved his life once during a cattle drive, said he was the best horseman he'd ever seen. Preston's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their task. "Your husband was too generous with his praise." "That was you, wasn't it?" He nodded once, seeming almost embarrassed. "Wasn't much. Just helped him out of a bad spot when a herd spooked." "He said you dragged him from under a stampede at risk to your own life." Preston shrugged. "Any man would have done the same." "No," Tabitha said softly. "They wouldn't have." She swallowed hard, seeing Philip's face in her mind, laughing, telling the story over dinner, full of life and future. "Thank you for that, for giving us those extra years." For the first time since receiving the letter, Tabitha felt something other than crushing grief, a flicker of gratitude that Philip's life had touched others, had been saved once before being lost forever. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was something. "I should go," Preston said, mounting his horse. "I'll check back on the horses next week if that suits you." "That would be fine, Mr. Xavier." He tipped his hat. "Preston, if you please, Mrs. Lowell." "Preston," she agreed, and watched him ride away, a solitary figure against the vast desert landscape. The work with Thornton's horses proved to be exactly what Tabitha needed. Each morning she rose before dawn, threw herself into the careful, patient labor of gentling the young animals, and ended each day physically exhausted enough to sleep without dreams. The rhythm of training, the small victories, the setbacks, the slow building of trust gave structure to days that had previously stretched endlessly before her. Preston came regularly, ostensibly to check on Thornton's investment, but clearly doing more. He fixed fences, repaired the barn roof, brought supplies from town. He never stayed longer than the work required, never presumed, never pushed. September turned to October, and the desert heat gave way to crisp mornings. On a clear Tuesday, exactly 2 months after she'd received the War Department letter, Tabitha found herself watching Preston repair her windmill. He worked shirtless in the afternoon sun, muscles moving efficiently as he tightened bolts and adjusted the blades. "Why are you really here?" she called up suddenly. He paused, looking down at her. "Windmill needs fixing. You know what I mean." She crossed her arms. "All these jobs, all these repairs. This isn't just about Thornton's horses." Preston climbed down carefully, wiping his hands on a rag before pulling his shirt back on. He faced her directly, his expression open. "Philip asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him," he said simply. "Before he left, we crossed paths in town. He was worried about the war, about leaving you, made me promise." The revelation hit Tabitha like a physical blow. "And you didn't think to tell me this? Didn't want you thinking it was obligation bringing me here." His voice remained steady. "It wasn't then, and it isn't now." "Then what is it?" Preston looked at her for a long moment. "I respected your husband, and I respect you, your grief, your strength. The rest," he shrugged, "that's for you to decide when and if you're ready. And if I'm never ready," the question emerged sharper than she'd intended, "then I'll still fix your windmill." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Some things are worth waiting for, Mrs. Lowell." That evening, after Preston had gone, Tabitha finally opened the box containing Philip's effects. The familiar weight of his watch, the letters worn soft from repeated reading, the ring that had adorned his hand when they'd made their vows 6 years earlier. She read each letter she'd written him, remembering the woman she'd been then, hopeful, certain the war would end quickly, confident in their future together. Among Philip's things, she found a letter she hadn't seen before, sealed and addressed to her in his familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. "My dearest Tabitha," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've failed in my promise to return to you. I'm sorry, my love, sorrier than words can express. Know that my last thoughts were of you, of the life we planned, of the joy you brought to every day we shared." Tabitha rayed through tears, Philip's voice so clear in her mind she could almost hear him speaking the words. Near the end, a passage caught her attention. "I've asked Preston Xavier to look after you should the worst happen. He's a good man, Tabby, one of the best I've known, trustworthy to his core. I don't ask you to stop loving me, I'm selfish enough to hope you never do, but I do ask you to live fully, to find happiness again. You deserve nothing less." She pressed the letter to her chest, a complex tangle of emotions washing over her. Grief, yes, always grief, but also a strange permission, as if Philip had reached across the divide to release her from a vigil he'd never wanted her to keep. The following morning, when Preston arrived to finish the windmill repairs, Tabitha met him at the gate. "I read Philip's letter," she said without preamble. "He told me what he asked of you." Preston nodded, his expression careful. "I would have done it anyway." "I know." She took a deep breath. "I'm not ready. For whatever this is between us, I'm not sure when I will be, but I think I'd like to try being friends." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "Friends it is, Mrs. Lowell." "Tabitha," she corrected. "Friends should use first names, don't you think?" "Tabitha," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "I'd be honored." Friendship with Preston came easier than Tabitha had expected. They fell into a comfortable routine as autumn deepened. He would arrive in the mornings to help with the heaviest chores. They would work with the horses together, and often share a simple lunch before he returned to his duties at Thornton's ranch. Their conversations, initially about horses and weather, gradually expanded to include their pasts, their hopes, their thoughts on everything from politics to the changing face of the West. She learned that he had a younger sister in San Francisco, that he'd been orphaned at 16, that he could read Shakespeare with surprising insight for a man who'd never finished formal schooling. He discovered her love of painting, her ambitious dreams for the breeding program she and Philip had planned, her secret fondness for dime novels about improbable adventures. As November arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Randsburg prepared for its annual harvest festival. The town might be diminishing as mines played out, but traditions held firm. "You should come," Preston suggested as they groomed horses side by side in the afternoon light. "The whole town will be there. Music, dancing, good food." Tabitha hesitated, brush pausing in mid-stroke. "I haven't been to a social event since." "I know," he said gently, "but it might be good. Philip wouldn't want you isolated out here forever." She considered his words. The thought of crowds, of sympathy, of whispers about poor widow Lowell made her stomach tighten. But Philip's letter echoed in her mind. "Live fully, find happiness again." "Will you be there?" she asked. "If you'd like me to be." "I would," she admitted, surprising herself with how true it was. The night of the festival arrived crisp and clear, stars pricking the vast desert sky like diamond chips. Tabitha wore her best dress, a deep blue wool she hadn't taken from the wardrobe since Philip left. She'd loosened her hair from its customary severe bun, allowing it to fall in soft waves around her shoulders. Preston arrived promptly at 7, looking transformed in a clean shirt, vest, and polished boots. He stopped short when she opened the door, an expression of undisguised admiration crossing his face. "You look beautiful, Tabitha," he said simply. She blushed, suddenly self-conscious. "It's just an old dress." "It's not the dress." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The town hall blazed with kerosene lamps and decorations of autumn leaves and harvest crops. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables groaned with potluck offerings. Tabitha braced herself for the awkwardness of being a widow at a social event, but found most people genuinely pleased to see her. Many commented on the progress of Thornton's horses, which had become something of local interest. "You've brought them along faster than anyone expected," Mrs. Henderson from the general store remarked. "Thomas Thornton's been telling everyone who'll listen about your magic touch with difficult horses." "They weren't difficult," Tabitha explained. "Just young and uncertain. They needed consistency and patience." "Don't we all?" the older woman said with a knowing glance toward Preston, who was engaged in conversation nearby. When the dancing began, Tabitha felt a momentary panic. She hadn't danced since before Philip left, and the thought of accepting any partner felt like a betrayal. She was about to suggest leaving when Preston appeared at her side. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, then added quickly, "As friends, of course." The qualification gave her the space she needed. "As friends," she agreed, taking his offered hand. Preston danced with surprising grace for such a tall man, leading her through the steps of a waltz with easy confidence. They moved well together, and for brief moments, Tabitha forgot her grief, forgot the watching eyes, forgot everything but the music and the simple pleasure of movement. "Thank you," she said as the music ended. "That was nice." Something flickered in his eyes. It was. They danced twice more before Tabitha felt overwhelmed by the noise and the crowd. Preston noticed immediately. "Would you like some air?" She nodded gratefully, and he guided her outside where the night was cool and quiet. They walked slowly along the main street, now empty with everyone at the festival. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I thought I was ready for all of that, but don't apologize," he interrupted gently. "You came, you danced, you smiled. That's more than enough for one night, did I?" she asked. "Smile," several times. His own smile was warm in the moonlight. "It suits you." Tabitha felt a strange flutter in her chest, like a bird testing wings long unused. "I wasn't sure I remembered how." "Some things the body doesn't forget," Preston said. "Like riding or dancing or joy." They walked in comfortable silence back to where his wagon waited, and he drove her home beneath the vast canopy of stars. At her door, he hesitated. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "It meant a lot to see you there." "Thank you for asking me." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm glad we're friends, Preston, as am I, Tabitha." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Preston," she called after him, "next week is Thanksgiving if you don't have plans. That is, if you'd like. You could join me for dinner." His smile illuminated his entire face. "I'd like that very much." The weeks leading to Christmas transformed Randsburg. Despite hard economic times, the town rallied with decorations and preparations for holiday celebrations. Tabitha found herself caught up in the spirit, hanging simple evergreen boughs around her porch and placing candles in her windows for the first time since Philip's departure. Training Thornton's horses had expanded to a full business again, with 2 more local ranchers bringing their stock for Tabitha's expert handling. Preston continued to help when needed, but their relationship had evolved beyond assistance. They enjoyed each other's company, sought each other out, shared books and ideas and quiet evenings by the fire on Christmas Eve. A rare desert snowfall blanketed Randsburg in white. Tabitha was placing presents beneath her small pine tree gifts for Preston, for the Hendersons who had been kind to her, for Mrs. Willoughby who taught at the schoolhouse when a knock came at the door. Preston stood on her porch, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, holding a small wrapped package. "Merry Christmas," he said, smiling. "I was hoping to catch you before tomorrow's festivities." "Come in before you freeze," she urged, taking his coat and hat. The domesticity of the gesture struck her suddenly how natural it felt to welcome him into her home, to care for his comfort. They sat before the fire, sharing mulled cider and the gingerbread Tabitha had baked that afternoon. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world in pristine silence. "I brought you something," Preston said, sliding the package across to her. "It isn't much, but when I saw it, I thought of you." Tabitha unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Inside lay an exquisite silver hairpin topped with a delicate silver horse. "Preston," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "The craftsmanship reminded me of how you work with the horses, attentive to every detail, bringing out the beauty that's already there." He looked embarrassed suddenly. "That probably sounds foolish." "No," she said softly. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." She rose and retrieved a package from beneath the tree. "I have something for you as well." Preston opened it to find a leather-bound journal with his initials burned into the cover and a fine fountain pen. "You mentioned wanting to write down your experiences," she explained. "The stories you tell about your travels, about the changing West, they deserve to be preserved." He ran his fingers reverently over the supple leather. "I've never owned anything so fine." "You've given me back pieces of myself these past months," Tabitha said, surprising herself with the admission. "Help me remember who I was before grief became my only identity. This seemed a small way to thank you." Preston's eyes, when they met hers, held a depth of emotion that made her breath catch. "You never stopped being that woman, Tabitha. Strong, compassionate, determined. Grief didn't diminish you, it just temporarily hid you from yourself. Outside, the snow fell harder, the wind picking up to create swirling white patterns beyond the windows. Preston rose reluctantly. I should go before this turns into a proper storm. Tabitha looked at the growing blizzard with concern. It's already a proper storm. The road back to Thornton's will be treacherous. I've ridden through worse. Don't be foolish, she said firmly. You can take Philip's old room for the night. I won't have you risking your neck in this weather. Preston hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. People might talk. People always talk, Tabitha said dismissively. I'd rather face gossip than have you freeze to death. The decision made, they settled into a comfortable evening. Tabitha prepared a simple supper while Preston tended the fire and saw to the horses. They ate together at her small table, sharing stories and laughter as the storm raged outside, transforming the desert into a temporary wonderland. Later, as she prepared Philip's old room, Tabitha was struck by the absence of pain. There was sadness. Yes, there would always be sadness, but the sharp, unbearable grief had mellowed into something she could carry without being crushed by its weight. Thank you for this, Preston said from the doorway as she laid fresh linens on the bed. For everything. She turned to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache in a new and unfamiliar way. Merry Christmas, Preston, she said softly. Merry Christmas, Tabitha. He smiled, the smile that had become as necessary to her days as sunlight. Sleep well. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the snow already beginning to melt under the desert sun. Tabitha woke to the smell of coffee and found Preston in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Hope you don't mind, he said. Thought I'd make myself useful. Mind. It's the best Christmas surprise I could imagine. She accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. They spent the day in simple companionship, walking through the snow-covered landscape, checking on the horses, reading by the fire. In the afternoon, they joined the town gathering at the church, where no one seemed particularly scandalized by their arrival together. Indeed, Mrs. Henderson went so far as to wink at Tabitha when Preston wasn't looking. The new year arrived cold but dry, the desert returning to its familiar rhythms. January brought news that changed everything. Thomas Thornton was selling his ranch and moving to San Francisco to pursue business opportunities there. What will you do? Tabitha asked Preston when he delivered the news, her heart suddenly racing with unnamed fears. He hesitated. Thornton's offered me a position managing his interests here. He's keeping some land, planning to expand into breeding horses rather than cattle. Less labor-intensive from a distance. Relief washed through her. So you're staying in Randsburg. If that's what you want, he said carefully. What I want, Preston took a deep breath. Tabitha, I promised I'd wait until you were ready to smile again. I've seen your smile return, watched joy find its way back into your life. But I need to know if there's a place for me in that life, beyond friendship. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Tabitha thought of Philip, of the letter giving her permission to find happiness, of the months spent rebuilding herself from the shattered pieces grief had left behind. I care for you, she said finally, the words difficult but necessary. More than I thought possible after losing Philip. But I'm afraid. Of what? His voice was gentle, of losing someone again, of surviving that pain a second time. Preston moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I can't promise nothing will happen to me. No one can make that promise. But I can promise that what we might build together would be worth the risk. How can you be so certain? Because I love you, he said simply. Not in place of Philip, not as a substitute, but for yourself. the woman who rebuilt her life with her own 2 hands. The woman who still cries sometimes but finds reasons to laugh again. The woman I've waited for. Tears filled Tabitha's eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. I think I've been falling in love with you too, slowly, quietly, when I wasn't paying attention. Preston's smile broke like dawn across his face. May I kiss you, Tabitha Lowell? She nodded, her heart thundering in her chest as he closed the distance between them. His lips met hers gently, a question rather than a demand, and she answered by leaning into him, allowing herself to feel the full measure of what had been growing between them all these months. When they parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I'll still wait, you know. For as long as you need. There's no rush. I've kept you waiting long enough, she whispered. I'm ready for whatever comes next. What came next was a careful courtship conducted in the open now. They rode together across the desert landscapes, shared meals with friends in town, worked side by side as Tabitha's business grew, and Preston established himself as Thornton's local representative. In April, with desert wildflowers painting the landscape in brilliant colors, Preston took Tabitha to a hilltop overlooking Randsburg. They picnicked beneath the vast blue sky, talking about the future, making plans. I want to expand the breeding program, Tabitha said, excitement coloring her voice. With Thornton's connections in San Francisco, we could develop a line of horses specifically suited to this country. Sturdy but refined, with good bone and sensible minds. Preston watched her with undisguised admiration. You're remarkable, you know that. Most people see this desert as something to endure or exploit. You see possibility. I learned that from you, she said honestly. When everything seemed barren, you showed me seeds could still grow. He took her hand, his expression growing serious. Marry me, Tabitha. She blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the proposal. What? Marry me? He squeezed her fingers gently. Build a life with me. Combine our dreams into something bigger than either of us could create alone. Preston, I'm not trying to replace what you had with Philip, he hurried on. I would never want to erase that. But I think we could create something new, something that honors the past while embracing the future. Tabitha looked out over the landscape, the town where she'd known both profound loss and unexpected joy, the mountains that had witnessed her darkest days and her gradual return to life. She thought of Philip, of his letter, of his last gift to her, permission to find happiness again. Yes, she said, turning back to Preston with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married in June 1902 beneath an arbor of desert wildflowers in Tabitha's front yard. The entire town turned out for the celebration, even Thomas Thornton returning from San Francisco for the occasion. Mrs. Henderson cried openly during the ceremony, while Mrs. Willoughby played the pump organ they'd brought specially from the church. As they exchanged vows, Tabitha felt Philip's presence not as a shadow but as a blessing. In her bouquet, she tied his wedding ring with a blue ribbon, something old, something blue acknowledging that love wasn't a finite resource that could only be given once, but an expanding force that grew with each person who entered one's heart. I, Preston Xavier, take you, Tabitha Lowell, to be my wife, Preston said, his voice steady and clear. To cherish in joy and in sorrow, to support in triumph and in struggle, to wait for when waiting is needed, and to walk beside when the path is clear. Tears blurred Tabitha's vision as she repeated her own vows, adding, Thank you for waiting until I was ready to smile again. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. They combined their skills and resources, with Preston's knowledge of the larger horse market complementing Tabitha's expertise in training and breeding. Together, they expanded her modest operation into the Xavier Lowell Horse Ranch, known throughout Southern California for quality stock. In the spring of 1903, as they celebrated their first anniversary, Tabitha shared news that left Preston speechless with joy. They were expecting a child. "Are you happy?" she asked as they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Preston placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "More than I ever thought possible. Are you?" "Yes," she said, realizing the truth of it deep in her bones. "Not because I've forgotten, but because I've learned that the heart can hold both grief and joy. They're not opposites, they're proof of how deeply we can love." Their son, Thomas Philip Xavier, was born in late October, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. The day they brought him home from the doctor's house in town, Preston carried them both over the threshold with reverent care. "Welcome home, little man," he whispered to the infant. "Your mama and I have been waiting for you." As Tabitha watched her husband cradle their child, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The devastating loss, the months of grief, the slow rebuilding of a life she'd thought destroyed forever. And through it all, Preston waiting patiently, believing in her capacity to heal before she believed it herself. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About waiting," she said. "About how some things are worth waiting for, even when you don't know what's coming." He smiled, the same smile that had first offered her hope when she thought hope was lost forever. "I would have waited forever for this for you, for our family." "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said softly. "For seeing who I could be when all I could see was who I'd lost." "You never needed me to become who you are, Tabitha," Preston said, shifting their son to one arm so he could embrace her with the other. "You rebuilt yourself through your own courage. I just had the good sense to recognize a miracle when I saw one." As night fell over Randsburg, wrapping their home in desert stillness, Tabitha Xavier looked at her husband and son, the family she'd never expected to have, the joy she'd never thought to find again, and knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," Preston answered. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Thomas was joined by a sister, Sarah, in 1905, and another brother, James, in 1908. The Xavier Lowell Horse Ranch flourished, becoming one of the most respected breeding operations in California, as the automobile gradually changed, but didn't eliminate the need for quality horses. In 1915, as the Great War raged in Europe, Preston and Tabitha celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary by expanding their property, purchasing the old Thornton spread when Thomas Thornton decided to retire completely to San Francisco. Their children grew strong and capable in the desert air, each developing their own relationship with the land and the horses that were their heritage. On a warm evening in the summer of 1920, as they sat on the same porch swing where they'd shared so many important moments, Tabitha rested her head on Preston's shoulder. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If the war hadn't taken Philip, if you hadn't kept your promise to him, if I'd sold everything and left after receiving that letter?" Preston considered the question carefully, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built together, at our children, at the life we've made, and I can only be grateful for the path that brought us here, painful though parts of it were." Tabitha nodded, watching their 3 children in the yard: Thomas, nearly 17 and almost a man; Sarah, 15 and fiercely intelligent; James, 12 and gentle with animals in a way that reminded her of Preston. "I kept Philip's letters," she said. For the children. So they would know about him, about that part of my life. As you should, Preston agreed. He helped make you the woman I fell in love with. Tabitha looked up at her husband, at the face now lined with years of sun and laughter, the sandy hair threaded with silver, the blue eyes still bright with the same steadfast love they'd held when he'd first promised to wait for her smile. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she admitted. "After that letter came, I thought my life was over, just obligation and endurance stretching endlessly ahead. And now," she smiled, the full, unreserved smile that had taken so long to return. "Now I know that grief isn't the end of the story. It's just part of a larger narrative, one that can still contain joy and hope and love." Preston kissed her gently. "That's all I ever wanted for you, to see you smile again, to know you could find happiness. You gave me time," she said. "When everyone else expected me to simply move on or forever mourn, you understood I needed to find my own way forward." "I would have waited forever," he said simply. As twilight deepened into night, their children came to join them on the porch, bringing lemonade and stories from their day. Tabitha looked around at her family, the one she'd built from the ashes of loss, the one that existed because a good man had promised to wait until she was ready to smile again, and felt a profound sense of completion. Life had not gone as she'd once planned, but in its unexpected turns, she'd found a richness she could never have imagined on that terrible day when the War Department letter arrived. She had loved and lost and loved again. She had rebuilt not just her life but her capacity for joy. And Preston had waited, believing in that capacity even when she couldn't see it herself. "Thank you," she whispered to him as their family gathered close. "For what?" he asked. "For waiting." She squeezed his hand. "For everything." Under the vast desert sky, as stars emerged like promises in the darkness, Tabitha Xavier smiled fully, freely, with her whole heart at the man who had taught her that some endings are really beginnings in disguise, and that love, true love, always knows when to wait.